A man named Abel stood with magic swirling in his hand. As others watched, he hurled the spell toward the enemy. Thus, the Twilight Overlord who brought darkness to this world was finally defeated by the hero Roy's party, or rather by Abel himself. However, people still feared the Twilight. One day, Roy informed Abel that his amber eyes no longer had a place in this peaceful world. So he asked Abel to lead the party, which left Abel stunned. In this world, a person's eyes reveal the nature of their magic. Those with an aptitude for fire magic are born with ruby eyes. Sapphire eyes indicate a water affinity, and emerald eyes denote wind. But those with affinity for all elements gain a golden, amber-like glow in their eyes. However, the majority of demons also had amber eyes just like Abel. Because of this, humans with such eyes were labeled as reincarnations of demons, so Abel became a target of fear and hatred. Thus, the gift of the amber eyes was both a blessing and a curse. With that, Roy believed Abel would be seen as a symbol of misfortune in time of peace. So he pointed him towards an isolated island and arranged for Abel to live in a villa that he prepared there. Hearing this, Abel realized want to confine him, who's his longtime companion. Additionally, he understood that he wanted him out of his sight, so he accepted Roy's decision and stated that he would leave and never return. However, he made it clear that he would not accept the offer of isolation. Even so, Abel did not place the blame entirely on them since the real problem was their treatment of sorcerers with amber eyes, and that is what an immature society does. After leaving the party, he sought refuge deep in the mountain. In an old laboratory, he perfected a spell that no one else in modern society could. Using this reincarnation magic, he poured everything into a casket. With it, he imagined a future 200 years ahead, a world where magic could achieve the impossible. In such a world, perhaps people would be more open-hearted, especially toward those with amber eyes. 200 years later, Abel finally emerged from the casket. Upon waking, he quickly checked his body. Following that, he noticed how easily the casket broke after such a long time untouched. So if his reincarnation spell worked, then this was 2 centuries into the future. With that in mind, he examined himself where his soul now housed in a vessel resembling his younger self. Though he could have crafted a better-looking body, he remained attached to his old appearance. In this era, no one remained who knew him, so it didn't matter. Suddenly heard a noise. Immediately, he sensed a demon's presence. Looking toward the door, he realized the footsteps belonged to a woman. So he wondered if demons had learned to disguise themselves as humans. Furthermore, they must be skilled since the cave was surrounded by protective spells. Hence, he questioned whether the barrier had weakened over the last 2 centuries. Still, he hadn't tested his young body's limits, so he had to be cautious unlike then. As the door creaked open, he began planning a preemptive strike. He then plans to blast the intruder with his strongest magic to gain an edge. As the door fully opened, he began casting his spell. However, he suddenly noticed something, so he quickly closed his fist to cancel the magic. The woman then appeared, but she stood in shock as she stared at him. Upon seeing her, he began to wonder who she was. Hence, he noticed her sapphire eyes that signify water magic and wondered if she was human. Suddenly, her basket fell to the ground and she collapsed to her knees. Additionally, tears streamed down her cheeks as she called his name. After that, she exclaimed that she had been waiting for this day for a long time. Upon hearing this, Abel realized she wasn't a demon, but he didn't recognize her. So he began to wonder if he had always known someone like her. Then a memory surfaced. Back then, Roy had questioned whether he had lost his mind. He pointed out that even if the girl was a child, she was still a demon and an enemy. Despite this, Abel chose to save the life of a demon girl immediately after defeating the Overlord. He had declared that a mere child posed no threat and that killing her would change nothing. But Roy had been stunned by his decision. Remembering the girl who once cried so much, he saw she still did, but never thought she'd come this far after 200 years. Hearing this, the woman was clearly shocked by his words. Still, he remarked that it had been a long time since he last saw her. Upon hearing this, she began to cry again. She then identified herself as Lilith and told him that she had finally found him. For over a century, she had been searching for him as she was determined to repay the debt of gratitude she owed him. At last, she had discovered the place where he intended to reincarnate. Hearing this, Abel remarked that time must have weakened the cave's magic. Setting the thought aside, he turned his gaze toward her. He noted that her eyes had once shared the same amber hue as his. It was known that the color of one's eyes reflected the color of their soul, so he wondered if she had somehow managed to change hers. Thinking this, he admitted that he had never been able to do the same back then. In response, she told him it would be faster to show him. She then raised her hands to her face and removed what she had been wearing. To his surprise, she opened her eyes, and it revealed her amber-colored eyes. After that, she showed him what she held in her hands and explained that they were called contact lenses. As he inspected it closely, he marveled at how the translucent sheet could alter eye color. After all, this world had a long and painful history of discrimination against eyes of color. So all those wars and lives lost were simply over the color of someone's eyes. So the thought that something so simple could have prevented it all left him speechless. But before he could continue, Lilith reached into her basket. As she wrapped a scarf around his neck, she mentioned a nearby house she prepared. He's confused about the scarf, so she explained that the scarf was designed to keep him warm as the weather outside was cold. Once they stepped out of the cave, Abel was taken aback by the surroundings. He saw endless snow across the land and a small village at the mountain's base. As they descended, he sensed how much Lilith had awaited his return, even though she never said it. Before long, they arrived at a spacious house equipped with all the necessary amenities. Inside, he encountered a light bulb for the first time along with the personal library. Noticing his reaction, Lilith explained that she was aware of his fondness for reading. So she believed books were the best way for him to catch up, and this made him thank her. Later, while reading, Abel reflected that books were once the greatest luxury 200 years ago. Back then, paper was costly and books were handwritten. But now, there appears to have been a technological revolution. People had created a magic stone that converted into various energy forms based on its use. Thanks to this advancement, civilization had progressed rapidly. Knowing this, he also speculated that these light bulbs likely glowed due to the power of these magic stones. Still, he wondered why magic wasn't enough and thought modern wizards had grown lazy. After some reading, his book fell when he realized his suspicions were correct. He found out that the overall skill level of today's mages had significantly declined. Also, today's groundbreaking magic was basic knowledge for children 200 years ago. Worse still, many of these books proudly presented flawed magic formula. So if anyone were to use them as a foundation, the spells would be riddled with errors and prone to catastrophic failure. So he concluded that while technology advanced, magic had declined, but his thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise. Listening closely, he determined it came from inside the house, but the footsteps didn't resemble Lilith's, which led him to wonder where she had gone. Suddenly, someone shouted at him and made him flinch. In front, a boy appeared and confidently assumed that Abel must be Lilith's younger brother. Hearing this, Abel wondered who the person was and if he knew Lilith. Suddenly, the kid ordered him to rejoice. He then introduced himself as Ted and announced that Abel would be under his guidance from now on. Hearing this, Abel wondered if Ted was trying to take him on as a disciple. However, he noticed Ted's flashy clothes and wondered if he was a noble. Suddenly, he recalled the nearby mansion and wondered if it was Ted's. Regardless, Abel had no interest in forming a teacher-student relationship with him. Still, Ted persisted and eagerly urged Abel to become his disciple. As the pestering continued, Abel began to wish the boy would just give up. With that in mind, he decided to scare him off. After he calmly closed his book, he told Ted to stay away. After that, he revealed his eyes and asked if he understood their meaning. Upon seeing it, Ted was visibly surprised, growing more confident. Abel explained that these eyes were tied to demons, but Ted simply burst into laughter. Amused, he pointed out Abel's amber eyes. As he laughed, he said it was his first time seeing them and was surprised they actually existed. However, this reaction puzzled Abel and wondered why Ted didn't seem afraid. At that moment, someone else arrived calling out for Ted. Upon seeing Ted, he reminds him not to barge into Lilith's house. Upon seeing him, Ted quickly addressed him as his older brother, Base. Excitedly, he urged Base to look at Abel. He then pointed out that he had never seen these chick eyes before, which left Abel confused. Suddenly, Base examined Abel's eyes. He then recalled that Lilith had mentioned her exceptionally gifted brother would be moving in, but it seemed Base had been expecting more. Suddenly, Ted declared that amber eyes like Abel's had zero aptitude with all magic attributes. He said those with such eyes couldn't use key magic types, so they are powerless. Hearing this, Abel was taken aback by this claim. In truth, amber eyes did require extensive training. For the first 10 years, they could not properly use any magical attribute, but after that, they could master all of them. Despite individual differences, they were capable of executing the highest grade magic in every element. Still, people with such eyes had historically been persecuted, yet there was no denying their exceptional potential. Meanwhile, Base began scolding Ted for going too far. He reminded him that even without magic, one could live a meaningful life. With that, he assured Abel they'd support each other and hope to get along. Hearing this, Abel wondered if Base also saw amber-eyed people as useless. Before leaving, Base urged Ted to go home and study since the Chosen had a destiny to fulfill. In response, Ted agreed and cheerfully said goodbye to Abel. As the door closed, Abel felt drained after the siblings barged in, criticized him, and quickly left. Still, he now understood what was happening. Based on the war history he had read, the demon race had not clashed with humanity in over 100 years, so the world was now at peace. Without the looming threat of demons, people no longer feared the amber eyes. But with magical standards declining, those with amber eyes who need extensive training had become subjects of mockery. Hence, he struggled to believe that after all the persecution, they now faced mere ridicule. Knowing this, he wondered whether it was truly that difficult to live a normal life. Later, Lilith finally returned. Upon seeing her, Abel realized she was a servant, but she clarified the modern term was housemaid. Smiling, she asked whether she looked good in her uniform, and he agreed. Setting that aside, Abel told her he finally understood that he now realized why she had gone to such lengths to hide the color of her eyes. He told her that in 2 centuries, amber eyes had gone from powerful to mock. Life had grown harder for amber-eyed people, and perhaps why she hid hers with lenses. In response, Lilith said the demon race had weakened over the past 2 centuries. After the heroes' party defeated the Overlord, humanity continued its assault on the remaining demon race. As peace gradually returned to the world, the overall skill level of mages began to decline. Consequently, fear of amber eyes faded and forgot they could become strong with training. With that in mind, Abel asked her if as a demon, she rescinded humans, but she smiled at him and reminded him that he had protected her in the past. He had traveled with her in search of a safe place to live. He also taught her magic and how to blend into human society. She then leaned toward him and expressed her deep admiration. As she smiled, she added that she had humble request if he truly cared for her. Later, as Lilith scrubbed his back, Abel wondered how it had come to this. Suddenly, she said that his concern had made her so happy, so she could no longer hold back her feelings. In response, he asked if she understood what it meant for them to be unclothed together in a bathtub. But she replied that it was amusing to hear that from someone who looked so young. She then hugged him and added that his words held no weight. However, they still made her happy, especially being acknowledged as a woman by someone like him. Hearing this, Abel fell silent. That night, they shared the same bed. For the first time in 200 years, Abel felt the sense of calmness in his sleep. Since his reincarnation, Abel began to settle into a routine. He spent his mornings having breakfast with Lilith and spent his afternoons in the library learning about the current world. But every midday, someone would inevitably barge into the room. That person was Ted, who persisted in calling him Chick Eyes. Abel assumed he wanted a playmate his age, but had no intention of entertaining him, so he cast magic on his foot. After that, he leapt out the window while saying he wasn't free to play with kids. Witnessing this, Ted was left in shock, but he saw Abel land safely on the roof of the neighboring building. So he began frantically questioning how Abel could move like that. Ted didn't know it was only a fraction of Abel's enhancement, but it already shocked Ted. Determined not to be outdone, Ted began casting enhancement magic on himself. After that, he leapt out of the window as well. Observing this, Abel noted that Ted could at least use basic body enhancement. However, his control was poor and too much unrefined magic was leaking out. Thus, it will waste energy and make the jump inefficient. As expected, Ted began to fall down and crashed into the bushes below. Abel quickly descended after him and asked if he was all right. In response, Ted quickly emerged from the bushes. He then shouted for Abel not to worry and charged toward him. But Abel simply flew upward to dodge, causing Ted to crash into a nearby wall. As Ted complained about his aching face, Abel remarked that he was surprisingly resilient. He added that with 20 more years of training, Ted might become decent at magic. Hearing this, Ted scolded him for not acting like an underling, but Abel said he never agreed to it. However, he paused when he realized something. He then told Ted that if he truly insisted, he wouldn't mind being his underling after all. Upon hearing it, Ted became excited that Abel was finally motivated. However, Abel clarified that there was a condition. Suddenly, he remembered how Lilith had given him the scarf to protect him from the cold. In a village where it snowed for half the year, it was a valuable item. Regardless, he told Ted that if he took the scarf before sundown, he'd be his underling. Ted then immediately claimed it would be easy. Unbeknownst to him, Abel already expected that he would continue to interrupt his studies, so he decided to use the opportunity for physical training. As Ted chased after him, Abel figured it would be mutually beneficial that way. Soon enough, Ted was already begging him to slow down, but Abel kept leaping higher to gauge the average mage skill in this era. Meanwhile, Ted was surprised by Abel's movements. Convinced he could match them, he cast magic on his foot. After that, he tried to jump upward, but he ended up slamming into a wall. Watching this, Abel realized the vast gap between their abilities. Still, Ted continued his jump. After that, he persistently tried to grab Abel's scarf. So as Abel continued to dodge him, Abel was genuinely surprised. By now, Ted should have realized how inefficient his body enhancement was, yet he kept hopping around without using magic and stubbornly chased him. Seeing him fall, Abel thinks that Ted wasn't the most good-looking and certainly not the brightest. However, he had decent stamina. Still, he was incredibly loud. After falling once more, Ted asked why he wasn't tired, but Abel figured their training differed. When Ted stood, Abel noted that sundown was far off, yet he seemed ready to give up. In response, Ted lunged at him in another attempt to grab the scarf. But his movements were too slow, so Abel easily dodged. He was so slow that Abel easily slapped his hand away. Eventually, Ted declared that he can't go on and slumped to the ground. Seeing this, Abel noted Ted lasted 20 minutes, which is longer than expected and likely had noble blood. After knowing that Ted had basic physical training, he decided to head back to the library. However, something caught his attention. He glanced toward a nearby window and saw Base engaged in a lively conversation inside. Curious, Abel enhanced his hearing to listen in. As the voices became clearer, he heard Lilith saying that she could not be in a relationship with Base. Abel was stunned by this. He then heard Base asking what was wrong with him. At that point, Abel realized he eavesdropped into a love affair. Nevertheless, he knew Base was a proud noble who would be deeply hurt by rejection. Suddenly, Lilith replied that it wasn't a matter of dissatisfaction. Instead, she revealed that she had already given her heart to someone else. Hearing this, Abel froze. Meanwhile, Base gritted his teeth in frustration and demanded to know if the person she loved was Abel. Lilith looked at him directly and responded happily with a yes. However, Abel heard her clearly and was surprised. On the other hand, Base was furious. Upon realizing that she had fallen in love with her own brother, he called her an immoral woman and said she should be ashamed. Hearing this, Abel was confused by this reaction. He wondered why Base called it immoral and found it harsh even for siblings. Besides, he was not Lilith's brother, but she had probably made it seem that way to fit her narrative more conveniently. Meanwhile, Base continued scolding Lilith for falling in love with her own brother. With that, he insisted on how immoral it was. Hearing this, Abel began to feel irritated by Base's remarks, but he paid the abrupt rejection, so he decided to act as if he saw nothing. Since that day, Ted had continued to chase after Abel. As a result, this turns into a daily routine. Over time, observing Ted made Abel come to a realization. As Ted persistently chased him, Abel noticed that his ruby eyes, known for strong fire magic aptitude, didn't seem to correspond to any remarkable talent in that area. And lacking innate skill, mastering elemental magic is an uphill battle. While leaping up onto a rooftop, Abel considered that it might simply be too difficult for someone as straightforward as Ted, yet Ted mimicked his movement to jump high. Seeing him follow, Abel confirmed he had some aptitude for physical enhancement. Unlike elemental spells, this magic relied more on instinct than logic. So he concluded that this may suit Ted better due to his direct and simple way of thinking. Just then, Ted charged at him again. As he closed the distance, Abel reflected on how much Ted had improved over the past few days. However, he didn't realize that Base was nearby and saw Ted with him. At that moment, Abel grabbed Ted's wrist while thinking he'd be average 200 years ago. Nevertheless, he tossed Ted aside while noting his performance had only slightly improved. He also kicked his leg and added that an attack of that strength wouldn't even bother a fly. As a result, Ted slumped into the snow and slid across the roof. Eventually, he reached the edge of the roof and came to a stop. Frustrated, he stood up and shouted back at Abel, but as he took a step, his foot slipped. He lost his balance, and before Abel could react, Ted had already fallen off the roof. As a result, he hit the ground hard and began clutching his leg in pain. Seeing this, Abel descended to check on him and was worried that he fractured himself. Although healing was not his specialty, he prepared to use recovery magic. However, Base suddenly arrived. Immediately, he pushed Abel aside so he could cast a recovery spell himself. Hearing this, Abel was surprised Base could use recovery magic without ashen eyes. Hence, he realized he may have underestimated Base. However, he noticed something off. As Base began casting the spell, Ted screamed in pain. Hearing this, Abel's concern grew. That's because recovery magic worked like building with blocks. The more advanced the magic, the finer the details. Normally, the process began with large blocks then smaller ones to maintain balance. So Base's rushed method was like placing a heavy block on a smaller one and gluing it. Still, Base continued using the spell, and this caused Ted to scream in pain. Seeing this, Abel knew that this could cause nerves and tissues to press against each other in harmful ways. So he urged Base to take him to the infirmary instead, but Base exclaimed that he hadn't asked for Abel's opinion. He then accused Abel of tripping Ted. He also reminded him that he was just a commoner, but Ted was a noble and the second son of the Langobard family. On the other hand, Abel is just an inferior-eyed bumpkin. So he declared that insulting a noble would not be taken lightly. Drawing his sword, Base announced that Abel would pay for this offense and that there would be no mercy. With righteous fury, he declared that this called for a duel. Hearing this, Abel was stunned. That's because Ted was still injured and clearly in pain. However, it seemed that Base was truly consumed by his anger. Furthermore, a crowd had already gathered due to the commotion, but it wasn't wise to attract this much attention in the middle of town. Still, he responded to Base and said it was fine. He then declared that he would accept the challenge. Hearing this, Base explained the duel was one-on-one with the first to surrender losing. Considering their age difference, Base offered Abel a handicap. However, Abel declined and said to begin quickly, which surprised Base. Nevertheless, Abel had no time to waste. After all, he was partly responsible for this situation and Ted needed proper treatment. With that, he hoped Ted could hold on just a little longer. Meanwhile, Base became enraged again after interpreting Abel's words as another insult. Wanting to make Abel regret his attitude, Bess raised his sword and cast a spell called Window Edge. As the attack neared him, Abel quickly dodged and silently acknowledged that Bess was better than he had expected. When he noticed a tree sliced cleanly by the magic, he concluded that Base's power was average, but his spell construction speed was remarkable. 200 years ago, only Abel could create spells that quickly. So for Base, doing so without showing signs of being exceptional made Abel suspicious. Thus, he wondered if the sword was responsible and perhaps hiding a mechanism. Just then, Base asked if this was Abel's first time seeing a regalia, and this confused Abel. Base then assumed Abel was from a backwater region and said the regalia sped up spell construction. Thanks to it, he could activate spells at overwhelming speed. With that being said, he swung his sword again. The attack chased after Abel, who barely managed to dodge. Looking closely, Abel noticed that the sword had a magical source embedded within it. Still, in his eyes, it looked no different from a fancy toy. Suddenly, Base began releasing a barrage of attacks to flaunt his power, but Abel effortlessly dodged them. Regardless, he found the situation absurd since he had no time for this farce. Frustrated, he decided to block one of the attacks with his bare hands. Witnessing this, Base was obviously stunned. Meanwhile, Abel noted that regalia had hastened the decline of modern magical skill. The tool was so convenient, and it led magicians to believe that there was no longer any need to construct spells from scratch. So in a world without demons, such a belief might not be dangerous. But Abel recognized that the regalia had robbed mages of their ability to think critically. But since Base had helped test his theory, he felt it fair to show their difference in power. Confused, Base asked what he meant by the real deal. Abel's eyes then began to glow. Magic gathered in his hands, and he conjured powerful version of Window Edge. The completed spell flew toward Base, who tried to block it, but he was ultimately knocked backward. But it's obvious that Abel only added flashy effects to highlight their skill gap and held back. On the other hand, Base could not accept that he had been defeated by a commoner with inferior eyes. But before he could finish his words, someone appeared. Without warning, Lilith kicked him in the face with enough force, and this sent him crashing into the ground. Following that, she calmly said she might have let it go if only she had been insulted, but she refused to forgive anyone who insulted Abel. Turning to Base, she asked him whether his life was truly precious to him. Hearing this, Base was in disbelief with Lilith. Meanwhile, Abel was obviously concerned for her. Later that night, the doctor informed Ted that a full recovery would take about 6 months. He acknowledged Ted's eagerness to play again, but advised him to be patient. After the door closed, Ted began to wonder if his recovery would really take that long. Unbeknownst to him, Abel was standing just outside the window. After some thought, Abel cast a teleportation spell inside Ted's room. After transporting, he recalled deciding to lead treatment to the Heir's medical mage. That's because he wanted to evaluate their ability. But 6 months was far too long, so he began casting healing magic on Ted instead. While doing so, he removed Basie's sloppy spell work. He also realigned the bone structure with precise magical reinforcement. As he worked, Abel remembered how he should have prevented Ted's fall in the first place. Regretting this, he whispered an apology to the sleeping Ted. The next day, Abel stepped outside the house, but he was surprised to find Base waiting there. Slightly confused, he called out Base's name casually, but Base scolded him and insisted Abel say Base-sama since he was just a commoner. Without warning, Base was struck on the head. As he knelt down in pain, a man standing beside him greeted Abel politely. The man introduced himself as Evans and said he wanted to apologize for the previous incident, but Abel was puzzled by the sudden formality. To his surprise, Evans knelt before him and asked forgiveness for his son's behavior. Alarmed, Base asked his father why he was bowing to a commoner with inferior eyes. He also pointed out that Abel was merely the brother of a maid they had hired. In response, Evans hit him on the head once more. He then explained that the misunderstanding was his fault for never telling Base the truth. With that, he then revealed that they did not employ Lilith at all. Thus, Evans clarified that it was Lilith who had hired them. Hearing this, Base looks dumbfounded. On the other hand, Abel finally understood the situation. After all, he wondered why a high-class demon like Lilith would humble herself before humans. Reflecting on history, he knew that demons had faced many challenges coexisting with humans. To survive, some demons had posed as belonging to nobles, but they subtly used their powers to influence society. Thus, this was likely how Lilith had adapted to the modern era. After that encounter, Abel never saw Base again. According to Evans, Base enrolled in a Syria magic academy known for elite magicians. Later, Evans began sharing a story with Ted about the snowy day. On that day, he had gone hunting in the forest and was attacked by a monster, but it was Lilith who had saved him. Using her magic, she defeats the creature. At that time, he felt lucky. Since then, she had aided their family, serving as both a good neighbor and life mentor. However, the word mentor caught Ted's attention. Suddenly, Evans encouraged him to continue getting along with them, and Ted eagerly agreed. That's because he already considered Abel a great friend. He also recalled his heel leg and felt he owed Abel both apology and gratitude. Later, Ted burst into Abel's home again, but now he began calling Abel master and asking to be under his care once more. In response, Abel asked him what that master nonsense was about. But from that day on, he slowly got used to Ted's presence and gradually adjusted to life in this world. With Lilith by his side, he's been living peaceful days. After 2 years near Abel's home, Ted was practicing a fire spell called Burning Bullet and cast it at his target with steady control. Watching him, Abel noted that Ted had improved significantly. Pleased, Ted said his progress would give him an edge in the next day's entrance exam. Knowing that, he eagerly asked Abel to take the Magic Academy test with. However, Abel asked him instead if he really needed a Magic Academy entrance exam. 200 years ago, he had been hailed as an unparalleled genius with no equal. Given that, he turned to Lilith and asked why he would need to attend an academy now. In response, she countered his question by asking what he planned to do if he didn't enroll. He then replied that he intended to travel around as an adventurer again. But Lilith informed him that the profession of adventurer had been abolished 10 years ago. In the past, adventurers hunted demons and sold their parts to the guild. But due to the significant decline in the number of demons, the role was deemed obsolete. Knowing that he still intended to pursue magic, she said that path was nearly impossible without graduating from academy. Hearing this, Abel struggled to accept it since none could teach him magic centuries ago. Suddenly, Lilith asked if he'd rather rely on her instead, but she's happy to support him. Hence, Abel asked her to stop and reluctantly agreed to take the exam. Later, at the entrance of the academy, Abel tried to stay optimistic and considered it an opportunity to broaden his horizons. Furthermore, he had already arrived at Asura Academy located in the capital of Midgard. As they entered, he overheard students remarking on his uniform without a family crest. Hence, one guessed he was the rumored inferior eyes and that the academy had lowered its standards. Hearing them say commoners should farm, Abel noticed they were students by their uniform. He also overheard them assume he entered through a wealthy family's donation. Convinced he used a backdoor, they predicted he'd fail, but Abel just thought nobles still lacked grace. On the other hand, Ted couldn't believe they judged by eye color, though Abel knew he once did too. However, both of them stopped when they heard someone call out the students for their behavior. Turning to look, they saw a girl reprimanding the group for insulting a commoner. In addition, she calls it disgraceful behavior even by noble standards. With that, Abel's attention was drawn to the crest on her uniform. He realized it looked familiar, though he couldn't recall where he had seen it before. Suddenly, one of the students rudely asked who she was, and the girl introduced herself as Ellie. Additionally, she vowed to become a great mage, graduate top of the academy, and make a name for herself. Thinking she's rude, they asked if she was an exam candidate and threatened to teach her manners, but Ellie remained unfazed. She then calmly drew her sword and pointed it at them. With sharp determination, she asked who truly lacked manners now. Meanwhile, Abel observed it and thought that Ellie displayed impressive swordsmanship. Suddenly, she ordered the men to leave her sight immediately. Realizing that their uniforms had been sliced, they quickly walked away while warning her not to get cocky. However, she paid them no attention. But seeing her leave, Abel decided to thank her and called out. But when he approached, she abruptly smacked his hand away. She then scolded him for daring to touch her since he's just a commoner. In response, Abel said he only wanted to thank her, but she told him not to get the wrong idea. She clarified that she only detested backbiters and had no intent to associate with commoners. Hearing this, he couldn't help but wonder if all the students at the academy were like her. Suddenly, she told him that if he wanted her attention, he would first need to become stronger. As she walked away, she added that she was only interested in the strong. Furious, Ted said she didn't know Abel's power. While Abel hadn't expected such a strong-willed girl, still something about her face seemed familiar to him. Later during the entrance exam, examinees began the first test since it had written and practical parts, where each is worth 100 points for a total of 200. The written exam covered general knowledge, magic language, and magic engineering. While answering, Abel found the general knowledge test unchanged in 200 years and too easy to fail. The magic language section was even simpler to the point that he yawned while answering. However, the final section of magic engineering proved more challenging. At the 12th question on Diplornicus' final theorem, he noticed a sharp spike in difficulty. With this, he thought it would be difficult to get a perfect score. Unfortunately for them, he was the person behind Diplornicus' final theorem. Later in the schoolyard, the examiner told candidates to use their regalias for the practical exam. With that, the examiner told them to choose a regalia matching their eye color. Hearing this, Ted was clearly excited. While Ted was busy choosing, Abel thought about the instructions of getting one that matched their eye color. However, there was no regalia designed for amber eyes, so he decided to pick a red one instead, which is a one-handed sword. Afterward, the examiner said the practical exam would test their magic power, but the target was made of dark matter, which absorbs magic. Hence, it wouldn't break, and they can freely unleash their strongest spell. After that, she began to ask who was ready to begin, and Ted immediately volunteered. After she accepted it, Ted stepped forward eagerly. However, Abel was concerned since despite watching over Ted's progress, he knew that Ted's magical abilities were still at a beginner level. However, Asura Academy drew elites from across the kingdom, so Abel hoped Ted wouldn't embarrass himself in front of the crowd. Soon, the examiner gave Ted the signal to begin. With that, Ted held up his regalia and shouted fireball. A small ball of fire then shot out from his regalia. However, Abel wasn't impressed. The spell was sloppy just as he expected. Ted was also clumsy, and using an unfamiliar regalia made things worse. Still, a fireball managed to hit the target. Seeing this, the examiner and the others were astonished. On the other hand, Abel had expected Ted to be mocked. However, the examiner called the result incredible. She even asked how someone so talented got in through general admissions, which confused Abel. Suddenly, other examinees whispered that following such impressive magic would be hard. Hearing this, Abel realized even a simple spell like Ted's was praiseworthy in this era. Soon, the other students took their turns casting spells like Wind Edge and Ice Needle. Watching them, Abel felt like he was watching children play. Eventually, the examiner called the final name and asked Abel if he was going to take the test. Hearing this, he knew she also assumed Amber Eye people could barely use magic, so her polite expression was just a mask of pity. Knowing that, he wondered how much longer he must endure such treatment. Just then, Ted shouted that Abel was going next and would show them some cool magic. Though momentarily stunned, Abel agreed with him. After he stepped forward, the examiner signaled for him to begin. And as he stood there, he began to consider his options. Suddenly, he thought of accepting Ted's challenge with a twist of his own. Meanwhile, Ted watched eagerly while the crowd turned their attention to Abel. Some began whispering he was slow due to the supposed limits of Amber Eyes. Unbeknownst to them, Abel was maximizing the projectile speed of his spell, increasing the power level, and integrating a scattershot formula. While on it, he remembered that the target was made of dark matter, so he activated the limiter release. Following that, he murmured the words Fireball Severed Rain. Immediately, his regalia glowed with intense magical energy. After that, he proceeded to unleash the attack. Watching this, the crowd gasped at how massive it was, but Abel knew it wasn't just big. In midair, the fireball split into dozens of smaller fireballs. Seeing this, Ted and the others were all left stunned. Soon, the fireball struck the targets directly and its surroundings. Watching this, the crowd couldn't believe that he destroyed the targets. Unlike them, Ted cheered loudly and was overjoyed by Abel's display. Meanwhile, Abel realized he overdid it since the entire area had been reduced to a wasteland. Still, he felt satisfied knowing this performance could dispel misconceptions about Amber Eyes. Meanwhile, at the alternate venue, Ellie cast her spell, Flame Edge. As she swung her sword, her attack struck the target with force, causing visible cracks to appear. Thus, the examiner and others were surprised to see the dark matter target damage. However, Ellie remained unimpressed. She wondered if the Academy's facilities were high level, but as people were too easily impressed, suddenly, she noticed another examiner approaching Professor Fighter. Curious, Ellie enhanced her hearing. Hence, she overheard her talking about the dark matter target and how it had been shattered by a candidate with amber eyes. Hearing this, she was visibly surprised. Thinking about the amber-eyed examinee, she wondered if they were talking about the commoner earlier. Knowing this, a smirk slowly formed on her face. After all, she thought it was getting interesting. Meanwhile, Ted walked proudly down the hallway since he's happy to get a grade along with Abel. He continued boasting it, but Abel knew they matched only because it was the top grade. Soon, Ted led him to the waiting room reserved for a grade candidate. Inside, the other examinees were already seated. As Ted guided Abel inside, the others immediately took notice of him. Whispers then spread about how he was the one who destroyed the dark matter target. Just then, someone called out to Abel. Following that, Ellie asked if he'd shattered the target during the practical exam. As Abel tried to recall if she was the same girl earlier, Ted quickly recognized her. Ellie then continued asking Abel how he managed to construct such powerful magic. Additionally, she said Amber Eyes had no magic type, so she asked if he trained with a famous magician. However, he didn't answer. Annoyed, she warned his skills would soon show in the next exam, prompting Ted to scold her for arrogance. However, Professor Fighter entered the room and ordered everyone to sit down. After that, she began explaining the details of the final exam, which is a duel simulation. Upon hearing it was a duel, Abel realized that this must have been what Ellie was referring to earlier. On the other hand, Fighter continued explaining that each duel would be one-on-one. The loser was the one whose academy provided barrier broke first, while matchups were based on practical exam results pairing students of similar strength. As expected, the first match was between Abel and Ellie. As Ted cheered from the sidelines, Abel calmly acknowledged the inevitable matchup. Meanwhile, Ellie wasted no time and ordered Abel to draw his weapon. Noticing her enthusiasm, Abel concluded that nobles in this era really enjoyed duels. Still, he told her he wouldn't use a weapon since he lacked combat skill with regalia. Understanding this, she realized he intended to fight using traditional magic. Still, she raised her sword and proceeded to attack while urging him to show his true strength. As she launched her assault, Abel observed that she was fast. So it surprised him that despite the general decline in magical skill over the years, someone like her still existed. In response, he began casting magic on his body so he easily dodged her strike. Seeing this, Ellie was taken aback by how quickly he moved. Meanwhile, Ted continued cheering with excitement. Now more serious, Ellie ignited her sword with flames. Following that, she attacked him with Flame Edge. Upon seeing the attack coming, he responded by casting his own version of Flame Edge. As his magic surged, an even larger wave of fire flew toward Ellie. However, Ellie was clearly stunned by this. Soon, both of their attacks collided and resulted in a powerful explosion. Witnessing this, Ted was stunned that their magic had actually clashed. As the dust settled, the once intact arena lay in ruins. In the middle of the destruction, Abel stood motionless. He glanced around and noticed that Ellie had vanished. With that, he wondered if he had gone too far. Unexpectedly, she emerged from the smoke. Seeing her, Abel realized she had been hiding her presence all along. As she charged toward him, he acknowledged that her tactic was clever, but she had chosen the wrong opponent. Without hesitation, he gathered magic in his hand and cast Burning Bullet. Seeing it coming, Ellie noticed that there were 12 fireballs. However, she was surprised by the speed of the spell. Knowing that, she finally admitted to herself that he was indeed strong. Soon, the fireballs struck her all at once and surrounded the arena in a thick cloud of smoke. Watching from the sidelines, Ted commented on how vast the difference in their skill levels was. However, Abel was unmoved. What surprised him more was that Ellie still looked ready to fight even after taking such heavy damage. Suddenly, Fighter announced that the protective barrier had been broken, so the match was over. But Ellie refused to accept the result. She mentioned that the exam results might already be determined, but she still wanted to continue the duel. Hearing this, Abel thought she was a remarkably stubborn person who wasn't fighting for the exam at all. When she planned to her sword, he saw her determination to prove herself by her own ideals. Following that, she declared that she'll prove she was strong. Upon hearing this, Abel questioned why she was so obsessed with strength in an era of peace. Since, unlike 200 years ago, people no longer needed power to survive. But Ellie disagreed because she claimed peace was an illusion. Moreover, she thought a century without conflict was too good to be true. Hence, trees didn't guarantee the absence of war, and the revival of the Demon King's soul remained a threat. She also noted that the neighboring country of Coldria was quietly strengthening its military, and monsters could still be hiding somewhere. Because of this, she refused to grow complacent in this fake peace, and she was determined to be strong. Throwing her sword aside, she shouted that she would also rebuild the house that raised her. In response, Abel turned to look at her. Ellie then began channeling her physical flare magic and surrounded herself in flames. Seeing this, Ted and the others watched in awe as her body was encased in blazing armor. After that, she proceeded to use forbidden magic and summon Rose Matter Sky. Soon, the flames twirl around her and twist into a pair of wings. Upon seeing this, Abel stood speechless while Ted could hardly believe that Ellie was flying. Still, she declared again that Abel should be ready as she intended to win, but Abel continued to observe her in silence. As Ellie floated in the sky, Ted wondered if she used aviation magic, which he thought was just a legend. Hearing this, Abel recalled that aviation magic required precise control over multiple attributes. And even during his era, only a few could master it. So for someone like Ellie who possessed ruby eyes, it must have taken a great deal of effort to use it. Watching her, Abel recalled a red-haired girl from the past who might have passed down this magic. Suddenly, Ellie asked if he had never seen this kind of magic before, but Abel replied that it was quite the opposite. As he cast a spell, he said seeing it revealed her family's background to him. Besides, he hadn't expected unique magic from 200 years ago to remain unchanged. Looking at her, he guessed her stubborn ancestors preserved this technique requiring life force to activate. So once his analysis was complete, he launched his countermagic. The spell struck Ellie directly. Although she attempted to dodge, it was too fast. After successfully neutralizing her spell by analyzing and responding to it, it shows the clear advantage of knowing a previously learned technique. As a result, Ellie's wings vanished. Seconds later, she began to fall, so Abel immediately jumped and caught her midair. Holding her, he noted she descended from Maria, the hero of fire, but Ellie seemed confused. After they landed, he told her she was impressive like Maria and encouraged her to keep improving. Soon after, Fighter announced that Abel was the winner. Hearing this, Ted cheered along with the rest of the crowd. As Abel left the arena, people began praising him. Meanwhile, Ellie sat down on the ground in disbelief. After laying on the ground, she couldn't help but begin crying. As she cried, she wondered what exactly made Abel so different. Later, at the academy, some professors discussed the examinees. They praised Ted, Eli, and Abel as three geniuses who could raise the academy standards. However, one professor stopped what he was doing after hearing this. The professor named Emmer disagreed since calling all three geniuses was misleading. In his view, there was only one real genius, and it was Abel. However, another teacher said Abel's magic was exceptional, but Eli matched him in strength. Hearing this, Emmer was unimpressed and thought these teachers needed to relearn the basics. He then explained that Abel's brilliance went far beyond his magic. That's because he had also solved Diplornica's final theorem, and this surprised them. Commonly, this problem is so hard that magic scholars still fail to understand. Yet, Abel not only solved it but improved it, which can earn national recognition, and this stunned the other teachers. Just then, the headmaster arrived and commented on the noise coming from the faculty. Emmer then praised the amber-eyed examinee's talent, which the headmaster accepted since Emmer said it. With that, Emerge said Abel could become the country's greatest future magician. But when he mentioned Abel's name, the headmaster reacted with shock. As a result, he accidentally spit out his dentures onto the floor. Seeing this, the teachers quickly rushed over to check on him. As the headmaster picked up his dentures, he asked Emmer to repeat the student's name. Emmer confirmed it again that his name was Abel. He also noted Abel's perfect scores and declared him the academy's greatest genius. Upon hearing this, the headmaster finally confirmed that his name is really Abel. Later that night, inside the academy, the headmaster still couldn't believe the name Abel. So he made his way to a hidden room guarded by a statue of a knight. Using his magic, he cast a spell on the knight's sword. In response, the door behind the statue slowly opened. Inside was another door, and he quickly stepped through it. As soon as he entered, the door locked behind him. He then approached a cabinet nearby and opened it. While on it, he recalled that he had stored something important there. Soon enough, a sealed letter appeared before him. He immediately untied the string and opened it. Inside was a message addressed to Roy's descendants. The letter confessed a truth meant only for his bloodline. The letter said Roy and the sorcerers of fire, wind, water, and ash were the four sages who defeated the demon lord. But that was a lie since none of them had actually been able to harm the demon lord. Hence, the one who truly defeated him was not among them. But it was a magician with amber eyes named Abel. But he acknowledged that this truth would likely be lost in history. Still, the headmaster had heard the story countless times from his late grandfather. The tale spoke of a forgotten fifth figure among the so-called Great Four. This man had amber eyes like the demons. Despite his power, he faced persecution and was erased from history. Even so, the headmaster doubted anyone could live for 200 years no matter how great they are. Still, dismissing the possibility as coincidence seemed reckless. So he resolved to assess Abel's power himself. The next day, Abel was calmly sipping his drink at cafe in the capital. Suddenly, Ted burst into the cafe announcing that the results were finally out. With excitement, he showed Abel that he had passed. He then offered Abel his result as well and asked if he wanted to see it. But Abel replied that there was no need since he knew he had passed, but Ted was confused. So he pointed out that the envelope had already been opened and Ted had looked at it first. Embarrassed, Ted admitted Abel's torn result sheet and Abel said Ted wouldn't bring bad news. Moving on, Abel closed his book and asked about the person standing behind Ted. Upon hearing this, Ellie awkwardly tried to hide, but her head was clearly visible. So she stepped forward and pretended to recall them from the previous day. She then said their meeting was a coincidence, but Ted recognized her and asked if she was there for tea. In response, Ellie admitted she liked the cafe's cupcakes. However, Abel could tell it was just a weak excuse and that she had followed Ted there. So he asked her directly to stop pretending and state her real reason. Ellie hesitated, then said it wasn't really a specific thing she wanted. Still, she said was actually curious about which class Abel had been placed in. She also admitted that she had much to learn from him and wanted to try her best, but Abel was unsure what she was trying to say. Before he could reply, Ted offered to share the information since class placements would soon be revealed. He proudly announced he and Abel were assigned to Class A and hoped Ellie would join them. However, Abel didn't see what difference it made to be in the same class. Nonetheless, Ellie seemed pleased to hear the news. After that, she cheerfully left the cafe. Meanwhile, Abel wondered what happened while Ted guessed she was just nervous about having no friends. However, their conversation was interrupted when someone else arrived. Upon seeing who it was, both Abel and Ted were visibly surprised. It was Lilith, but she's now wearing a different uniform. Noticing this, Abel immediately asked what was with her outfit. So she explained that she had just been appointed as a teacher at Asura Academy. Hearing this, Ted was surprised and thought the timing was oddly convenient. However, Abel wasn't surprised at all. He knew Lilith's determination and long life gave her a clear advantage. Suddenly, Lilith whispered to Abel that she would now support him as a teacher. The day before the entrance ceremony, Lilith guided Abel and Ted to the student dormitory. When they arrived, they were impressed by its size. So Lilith explained the academy had a 5-year system and all students lived on campus. After sharing basic info, she excused herself to attend her duties as a new teacher. In response, Abel thanked her while Ted hoped to see her again the next day. As they carried their belongings, Abel noticed that Ted seemed to be struggling. So he said Ted should have packed lighter, but Ted had no excuse. Just then, a woman appeared and noticed that they were the new students. So she introduced herself as Feeder, the first-year dormitory teacher. While Abel recognized her from the entrance exam, Ted looked surprised she was a teacher. Setting that aside, Feeder verified their names and gave them their academy uniforms. She also reminded them that casual clothes were allowed inside, but uniforms were required outside. Upon receiving the uniform, Abel immediately noticed that it was enchanted. Fedir confirmed this and explained the enchantments gave magic and dirt resistance. Curious, Abel asked who enchanted it, and she said it's likely an academy contracted specialist. After getting their room keys, they had the day free before the entrance ceremony. With that, Abel and Ted headed to their respective rooms. Once inside, Abel kept examining the uniform. Noticing this, Ted asked if he was really that interested in it. Abel then explained that enchanting objects was a specialty of black-eyed magicians who were capable of improving the properties of items like uniforms. However, he found the enchantments on this one to be third-rate and a waste of good materials. With that, he decided to re-enchant it. With this in mind, he asked Ted to hand over his as well. After reworking the enchantments, Ted tried his own. Immediately, he felt that the uniform was much lighter. Hearing this, Abel assumed the base material was excellent, so the adjustments were easier. After that, he then prepared to re-enchant his own uniform. However, Ted suddenly grabbed his belongings and declared he was starting his manju diplomacy. But Abel was confused until Ted showed a box filled with Langobard specialty called snowball mangas. Seeing this, Abel finally understood why Ted had packed so much, but Ted urged him to try one. After a bite, he said he lived in Langobard over 2 years, but the supposedly famous mangas was just average and unknown. Still, Ted was determined to distribute them to their neighbors. After all, his goal was to make 100 friends. With that, he left immediately. Watching him leave, Abel thought that Ted could truly make 100 friends. As for him, he simply wanted to graduate quietly without any drama. Setting that aside, he then resumed enchanting his own uniform. After finishing his adjustments, he decided to take a short nap since it drained from the magic work. But before he could rest, he heard someone shouting outside. As he peeks, he saw several students confronting Ted. One of them asked if Ted was trying to insult them, but Ted explained that he was just trying to make friends. Hearing this, Abel wondered if Ted's manju diplomacy had backfired. Suddenly, another student shouted that Ted could dream on. That's because they think that no one would want to be friends with someone like him, especially not a poison perch. Hearing this, Abel wondered what exactly they meant. However, he had read about it in books. Poison perch referred to an invasive freshwater fish species that had rapidly multiplied in urban rivers, but their rapid breeding and diet harmed the aquatic ecosystem. Meanwhile, Ted continued rummaging through his bag. After that, he urged them to try the local specialty from his hometown. However, one of them slapped the food out of his hands and told him to shut up. And even though the food was now on the ground, he continued calling Ted a poison perch. With that, Ted looked down at the manju now on the ground in disappointment. Watching the scene unfold, Abel thought was cruel, but he also wondered whether these students had never been taught not to waste food. Nevertheless, he considered stepping in. But before Ted could pick up the fallen snack, someone else approached. Ellie then picked up one of the manju and ate it in front of everyone. As a result, Ted and the students were clearly stunned, but she didn't care and gave it a score of 70. She also commented that it wasn't bad, but could use a more distinct local flavor. Hearing this, the bullies recoiled and called poison perches disgusting after she ate from the floor. However, Ellie looked at them and asked what they had just said. Meanwhile, Abel began to worry since he wasn't sure what Ellie might do next. So he intervened and asked them to stop, but the bully asked who he was. Before Abel could answer, Ted assured him that he didn't mind what had happened. He also thanked Ellie, but Ellie questioned him instead if he had any pride. However, Ted responded that it wasn't about pride. At that moment, Abel began to the discrimination among the nobility. As Lilith said, the academy accepted internal students from its prep school and external students who had passed the public entrance exam. Now he realized poison perch was likely a slur against external students like them. Suddenly, the bullies overheard Ted calling Abel master, so they began wondering if the ember-eyed boy they saw was the one Ted referred to. However, they think someone with those eyes couldn't be a master. Hearing this, Ellie ordered them to stop, but Ted shouted at them not to insult his master. Hearing this, Ellie, the bullies, and even Abel were momentarily speechless. Suddenly, Ted grabbed the collar of one of the bullies and demanded an apology, but the bully's leader ordered Ted to let go and called him disgusting. At that moment, Ted recalled the time he had mocked Abel's eyes. To top it all, he even calls them chick eyes. Remembering this, he felt frustrated, but he still stood firm and continued calling Abel his master. Confused, Abel waited for what Ted would say next. However, the leader of the bullies began ordering Ted to release him. Hearing this, the other bully also tried to pull Ted away, but he did not flinch. However, Abe and Ellie noticed something strange. Suddenly, Ted's uniform that was touched by the bullies began to glow. In the next instant, a magical force burst out, which surprised Ellie. On the other hand, the bullies' leader and his lackeys were thrown into the ground. Dazed and confused, their leader asked what had just happened, but Ted looks like he didn't know either. Meanwhile, Abel immediately realized his enchantment on Ted's uniform had activated. It was a simple reflection spell that activated only when the wearer was physically attacked. Apparently, it worked quite well and the timing was fortunate. With that, the bullies began to retreat but also warned Ted that they would remember this. However, Abel knew Ted was more skilled and it could have ended much worse for them. Meanwhile, Ted was still stunned. Soon after, he turned to Abel to say that the bullies were thrown away without him doing anything. Hence, he wondered aloud if he had finally awakened some hidden power, but Abel doubted it since neither the students nor Ted had any real strength. Suddenly, Ellie grabbed Ted's arm to inspect his uniform. Upon checking it, she was surprised by the well-done enchantment that she saw for the first time. Proudly, Ted said Abel did it himself and that Abel was skilled in enchantment magic. However, Abel quickly tried to silence him and warned him not to say anything unnecessary. Regardless, Ellie was visibly surprised that Abel was the one who had crafted the enchantment. Suddenly, Abel began dragging Ted away, so Ellie tried to stop them. However, she still doubted Abel cast the enchantment because the uniform's magic was unusually complex. As they left, Ted asked if Abel was shy, but Abel told him to be quiet. With that, Ellie was left with mixed feelings. Soon, she remembered she came to invite them for a dorm tour, but forgot to mention it. The next day, inside the academy, Abel and Ted seen running through the hallway. As they rushed, Abel remarked that they were already late for the entrance ceremony. In response, Ted apologized that he had a poor sleep due to new pillows, but Abel just called him delicate. Eventually, they arrived at a large door. However, Abel began to stare at it intently. Ted then noticed this and asked what was wrong. Suddenly, Abel raised his hand to examine the door that was integrated with magical formulas. After analyzing the structure, he realized it was a welcoming enchantment set for new students. So he stepped aside and told Ted to go in first after he opened the door, but Ted hesitated. Following that, he began to speculate that the door shocked late students. However, Abel only said he'd understand once inside, so he quickly said he wasn't mentally ready. Regardless, Abel gave him a push. The moment Ted entered, a series of magical dolls activated. With that, Ted was stunned by the sudden music playing. Meanwhile, Abel thought that whoever designed this had a strange taste. Still, the dolls around continued playing music, while some dolls danced around as part of the display. Baffled by this, Ted asked what was going on. Abel calmly explained that it was just a basic enchantment triggering a mechanism, where the spell reacted to the magical power of whoever opened the door. As the performance continued, the other students' attention was all directed to Ted. While Ted was still surprised, they talked about how he activated the rare March of Nights and thought he's a prodigy. Meanwhile, Ellie just silently observed everything. On the other hand, Abel thought the setup was clever, and it was a stylish way to welcome incoming magicians. Nearby, Some students praised Ted and assumed Abel was just his assistant because of his amber eyes. Meanwhile, some professors were amazed by Ted's display and felt Emmer should have seen it. On the other hand, Ted wondered how it worked even though Abel had already explained it. Suddenly, the headmaster appeared and said he was glad to hear the March of Knights this year. After that, he introduces himself as Mike, the headmaster of Asura Academy. Following it, he began congratulating the freshmen. Meanwhile, Abel took a seat and quietly scanned the hall. Hence, he estimated that there were around 200 students per grade level. Suddenly, Ted leaned over and asked if he knew who the headmaster was. He then revealed that Headmaster Mike was a descendant of Roy, the hero of Wind. Hearing the name Roy, Abel recalled it had been a long time since he last heard it. 200 years ago, Roy had been part of his party. During the Overlord subjugation, Roy was like a younger brother to him. Remembering this, he somehow felt down. Suddenly, Ted said the info was in the pamphlet, but he admitted he hadn't read or cared about it. Afterwards, the headmaster continued with his lengthy speech. During that, he covered school policies and introduced the new faculty members. However, Abel found the whole thing boring and unnecessary. After the ceremony, Abel and Ted began looking for Class A's designated classroom. As they walked, Ted pointed out that Abel seemed off. Abel denied it, but his expression changed as he suddenly sensed something. Noticing this, Ted asked what was wrong. Abel then turned around and felt an unfamiliar gaze. However, it wasn't coming from a person but from a regalia. Knowing that, he wondered if someone had already discovered his true identity. However, the magic was too weak for a human, so he concluded someone was spying through a regalia. Meanwhile in class, a student asked the bully leader if Ted was the one who beat him, annoyed him. Still, he clarified that it was the enchantment that sent them flying, but the girl didn't believe it. Nearby, Ellie listened as she also mentioned the magical doors that Ted activated. Just then, Ted entered the classroom. As a result, the entire room fell silent. Noticing the sudden change, Ted felt uneasy, but Abel told him it was pretty normal. Across the room, the bully leader and his companion continued glaring at them. Before long, someone else entered the room. Upon seeing him, the girl beside Ellie was stunned. After the man placed his book on the table, he let out a yawn while the girl exclaimed he was Professor Amour. Hearing this, he confirmed that she was correct. However, Ted was also shocked. Seeing this, Abel asked if Amour was famous, and Ted nodded. He explained Amour was a Kronos executive candidate and the strongest modern magician. Hearing this, Abel recalled Amour was often mentioned in modern magical engineering textbooks. Looking closer, he admitted Amour might be competent for a magician of this era. Suddenly, Ted said Amour made the magical engineering test during the entrance exam. Hence, that would explain why it was so difficult. After a while, Emmer skipped roll call and introduced himself as their homeroom teacher. Abel then observed that Emmer's hair was a mess and his shirt was untucked, so he looked shabby. With that, he seemed odd, but Abel knew skilled magicians often were. Suddenly, a student asked if it was true that Emmer was too busy with his research to attend classes. Emmer admitted he focused on research and kept the teacher title to secure government funding. Hearing this, the girl asked why he would bother acting as their advisor. In response, he revealed he wanted to check something in the class himself. As he said that, he looked directly at Abel, but Abel noticed the gaze and thought it felt the same as before. However, Emmer added that the reason was a secret, and Abel said nothing in response. After that, school life began for Abel. In the morning, he attended classes, read in the library after school, then returned to the dorm for a shower. After that, he'd spend his evenings reading again before sleeping. Occasionally, he would have short conversations with Lilith, which is a fulfilling routine. However, the problem was the classes themselves. That's because he found them unbearably dull. On the other hand, Ted was visibly struggling to keep up with the high-level material, but Abel found most lectures pointless and used class time for his own research. After all, he could make progress anywhere with just a pen and paper. But at that moment, a professor noticed he was distracted, so he called him to the front of the class to solve a problem on the board. Internally, the professor viewed his amber eyes as inferior and his ignoring the lesson as arrogant. With that, Abel realized he had been caught not paying attention. Still, he stood up since it was ridiculous to use him for public embarrassment. Approaching the board, Abel recalled the professor's fast-paced lesson and warned his solution might differ. As he wrote on the board, he carefully made it for the students to understand. After that, he showed that the magic formula could be shortened by using shortcuts. Hearing this, the professor and the students were visibly stunned. Meanwhile, Abel admitted he hadn't paid attention, but wished the lessons helped students learn. Hence, the professor gritted his teeth while praising Abel and telling him to sit down. Just as Abel turned to return, someone muttered the word show off. That person despised Ted and Abel, believing studying was useless without magic. Still, Abel quietly returned to his seat and ignored the remark. Afterward, he went to one of the 5 libraries in the academy. This great library had many books but was crowded, so he only borrowed from it. After that, he would read them in the smaller libraries. At that moment, someone called out to him. When he looked up, he saw Ellie pointing out that he was studying there as well. However, he was surprised to see her at the library, but she replied it helped her concentrate. She then asked about his homework, but he only said he does it quickly in his room. After that, they both continued with what they were doing. Suddenly, Ellie paused in her writing and was clearly struggling. So he told her to separate the problem's 2 formulas. Seeing him continuing his readings, she fell silent. After a while, she called out to him again. She then pointed to her notebook and asked if she had done it correctly. Upon checking, he noticed she was faster and understood better than Ted. Later outside, she thanked him for his explanation that was easy to understand. With that being said, she asked if he always spent his time reading books in the library. But this made him ask if she thought it was strange, and she replied no. Still, she wondered if he ever went out considering they lived in the city. Knowing that, she said there were a lot of things to experience that couldn't be found at school. She then listed restaurants, fruits, and sweets, prompting him to note they were all food. Hence, she quickly added places like second-hand bookstores which caught his interest. Noticing this, she explained that he might find cheap and rare books there. With that, he realized he would indeed like to visit bookstores from this era. Unexpectedly, she invited him out on their day off to thank him for his help. In response, he said he didn't mind, which made her smile. But then someone interrupted them. Nearby, the bullies mocked Abel for getting along well with Ellie. When Abel recognized them, he calmly asked if they needed help. However, the bully told him not to act superior as external student instead. With that, he questioned how someone with inferior eyes got admitted and assumed bribery happened. Thinking of this, the leader suggested that Abel should read you the entrance exam. After all, they felt confident since Ted wasn't around to protect him. Meanwhile, Ellie was surprised when the bully took out their regalia. However, Abel remained calm and asked why they hated external students so much. Hearing this, the leader was triggered, so he shouted that the external students weren't equal despite passing the exam. On the other hand, they had dedicated years to their studies, while external students simply waltzed in and acted like they owned the place. Knowing this, it infuriated him. However, Abel realized their anger stemmed from pride and agreed. After dropping his bag, he passed by and mocked their poor equipment for fighting. Hearing this, the bully was shocked to realize his regalia had already disappeared. Just like them, Eli was stunned. As they wondered when he had taken them, Abel checked the regalia. After that, he asked if they even maintained their regalia. He also noted the materials were degraded, causing magical distortions, throwing back their regalia. He warned them to care for their gear if they wanted to be magicians. After the leader caught his regalia, Abel asked Ellie to grab his bag so they could leave. Meanwhile, the leader was frozen in frustration. He then gripped his regalia tightly and shouted at Abel not to get cocky. With that, he warned they'd embarrass them and told them to watch tomorrow's lesson. Hearing this, Abel silently wondered if they were still planning something. The next day, Ted was full of energy because it was finally time for physical class. Seeing this, Abel found him intense, but he also understood the excitement since physical class was only weekly. Suddenly, someone arrived and announced that everyone was gathered. He then introduced himself as Cantor, their PE teacher, and noted prep school students might know him. After that, he announced they'd play Hound, which excited most students, though Ted was unsure what it meant. So Cantor explained Hound, but the bully leader said they already knew. Hearing this, he laughed and told them they didn't quite get it. He then said the lesson would be adapted for those unfamiliar or unable to join. With that, the leader remarked that outsiders required more effort. Hearing this, Ted and Ellie were taken aback. Still, Ellie didn't mind and claimed outsiders like them would deliver defeat. But Ted told her to just enjoy class while Abel knew it was harder for them to face failure. Afterwards, Cantor said he'd divide students into teams by calling names. While others quickly formed teams, Abel waited patiently. At last, his team was finalized. Meanwhile, Ted was pleased to be on the same team as him. However, Ellie called Ted an acorn for being carefree, and this confused him. After she confirmed that he hadn't noticed, Abel pointed out Team D was all outsiders. Hence, it felt like they were being targeted, which made Ted finally understand. Suddenly, a girl worried she was bad at sports, while the specs guy preferred intellectual tasks. Meanwhile, the other two claimed to be decent, but Abel doubted it. With that, Ellie reassured she'll back them up, but the girl thinks the insiders look down on them. In response, Ellie said no one would cheat, so they'd fight fair and prove them wrong. While the group was upbeat, Abel suspected the opponents would backstab them. Suddenly, the bully leader whispered to him to have a good game. In addition, he promised to make up for what happened yesterday. After hearing this, Abel also noticed Cantor smiling nearby. So this made him suspect that even the teacher was in on it. After some time, Cantor began the match between Team B and Team D. He explained that in Hound, the Team B shooters would have 3 players, which were the bullies. Meanwhile, Team D would be the rabbits, and each group would take turns attacking for 5 minutes each. With that, shooters would use a shock glove regalia and launch bullets at the rabbits. But there were 3 bullet types, a spear type for speed, a balanced spherical type, and a disc type that was easier to maneuver. The shooter's goal was to hit the rabbits and make them fall, while the rabbits' goal was to avoid being hit, and the team with the most surviving members would win. Hearing this, Ted realized it was similar to dodgeball, except the players were split into offense and defense. Meanwhile, Abel saw Ted dodge a bullet from behind, and was unsurprised by his agility. He also suspected Ted had reacted to the air vibrations caused by the shot. Soon, the man with glasses was hit. Seeing this, Abel knows he's now taken out of the game. As he left, Abel thought that magic without attributes might be weaker and non-lethal. But as he dodges, he knew that magic is still magic. So when he noticed how Ted used magic for defense and how Ellie skillfully evaded attacks proves that even training bullets still stun, suddenly, Abel saw 2 incoming shots aimed at him. He found it strange that the bullies would attack so directly. But mid-flight, the shots suddenly curved to the side. Abel was caught off guard by this. But when the shots continued, they struck 2 of his other teammates instead. Hence, Ellie was startled when she saw them slump to the ground, but Abel quickly understood what the opponents were doing. As expected, the bully leader gave him a sarcastic, knowing look. Meanwhile, Ellie began confronting the bullies. She pointed out that they were cheating. Hearing this, Abel realized she had noticed it too. Earlier, he saw the attribute less magic had syntax for target tracking. This meant the shot gloves they prepared had been illegally modified. However, the bullies told Ellie to stop talking nonsense and even called her a fatty. Furious, she demanded they repeat it, but Abel held her back to not get worked up. As they dodged attacks, he told her to stay focused since distracting foes with words is basic in battle. Aside from that, they are still shooting from the sides, so she must focus. Hearing this, she shyly thanked him. When the attacks resumed, Abel noticed a few interesting members in his team. One of the girls warned Ellie to look behind her, which allowed her to dodge in time. With that, Ellie thanked the girl whose name was Yuka, but Yuka said Ellie had done well herself. Looking at her, Abel had thought Yuka was faint-hearted at first, but she was now showing effort. She even warned Head of attacks which showed calm and wide vision even though her physical skill was lacking. If they can fix her personality, she could become an excellent magician. However, Abel noticed something again. He saw the bully shots all begin targeting Yuka. As a result, she was hit in the back and went down immediately. Seeing this, Ted and Ellie were worried. Meanwhile, realized the bullies had focused on their spotter as their strategy. With that, the leader called Yuka a hindrance and aimed again at her since a slow player should just leave the field. Yuka then started crying, and as she turned, she was hit again. Witnessing all this, Ellie and Ted were shocked. So Ellie hurriedly questioned the bully's actions, but the bully asked instead what she meant by what. Nevertheless, the bullies kept firing and claiming they were just removing a weak player. Seeing this, Ted tried to stop them, but Yuka was already hit again and groaning in pain. As Ted moved to her, Ellie shielded her and told them to stop since Yuka was already down. She also said they shouldn't attack fallen players, but the leader denied any such rule. Hence, they continued to attack since they are still in the game. Because Ellie was wide open, she was then struck. Upon seeing Ellie also fall, Ted called out to her. On the other hand, Abel noted that one of Ellie's weaknesses was her tendency to get emotional. But suddenly, Ted raised his hand to get the teacher's attention. He then told him that the attack shouldn't count, but he was hit before anything could be done. So when he fell, Ellie called out to him. Seeing this, Abel murmured that many go out for wool and come home shorn. Suddenly, the leader said that outsiders were worthless. With that, he encouraged them to go back to where they belonged. Hearing this, Ellie and Ted were angry, while Yuka was still sobbing, and Abel remained silent. However, only 2 minutes had passed since the start, and there was now only one player left, which was Abel. Knowing that the bullies prepared themselves. After that, their leader asked how they should deal with him, but Abel simply looked at them in silence. Regardless, the bullies' leader shouted to crush the remaining poison perch. Hence, the rest of the bullies joined the attack and directed it toward Abel. At that moment, Abel considered that it might be less of a hassle to simply let them win. But since they had gone this far, he refused to stand still and began dodging. When he successfully evaded the attacks, the leader unleashed a flurry of shots, but Abel avoided every one of them. Seeing this, Ted and the others began cheering, but the leader only laughed while continuously attacking Abel. He also claimed that Abel should be out of breath by now. But in reality, Abel was fine, and it was the bullies who were starting to tire. Suddenly, they were informed that only 1 minute left. Knowing this, the leader realized he had no choice but to use another tactic. With that, the bullies launched a combination attack. Upon looking up, Abel saw the incoming barrage. Meanwhile, Ellie and Ted were visibly worried, but Abel noticed the bullies added a scattering bullet syntax to cheat again. Regardless, the leader was confident Abel couldn't dodge this time, but Abel knew he could, and that would be too suspicious, so he decided to break the rules himself since they started it. Immediately, he activated his magic. After that, authorized it and muttered counter magic. Suddenly, a shield formed around him, and he even voiced a bit of distress to avoid suspicion. As a result, the others, including the bullies, were confused. Nevertheless, Abel remained unharmed. Soon, the leader noticed that his regalia seemed broken. Not long after, Team B's attack phase ended. With that, Ted and the others praised Abel for handling the situation alone. However, Ted began asking questions again, so Abel quickly told him to be quiet. But he was the sole survivor, and they had to defeat the opponents in the next round, or else they would lose. Regardless, Ted remained confident they would win. Just like him, Ellie was fired up to show her true skills. Hearing this, Abel thought it would be great if those two could wipe out the enemy. However, the bullies mocked their excitement and vowed to destroy them. Hearing that, Abel suspected they had another plan. Soon, Cantor started the next round. Immediately, the bullies' leader shouted to form. In response, the team formed into a phalanx formation. Seeing this, Ted scoffed that it made them an easy target. Agreeing to this, Ellie declared that she would smash them all together. As the attacks neared, a bully warned of a spear shot from the northwest. Just like him, another member reported a disc-type attack from the southeast. Seeing them dodged successfully, Abel realized their plan. He found out that they were using everyone to monitor all directions. While on it, they share information to eliminate blind spots. Hence, this was a true phalanx, but Ted began urging him to help reach the opponents. Meanwhile, Ellie was also struggling despite her stronger magic. With that, Abel admitted that the enemy's teamwork was impressive. Suddenly, the leader taunted them for failing to pull off even a basic pincer attack. As he did, Abel called for Ted. Following that, he urged him to come to him, but this confused Ted. Regardless, he tells him that Ellie was getting tired and Ted would be their key. After that, he began to whisper the plan to him. After discussing it, they both turned their attention back to the opponent. Soon, Ted's gaze hardened with determination. He then raised his hand and summoned the holy spears. Meanwhile, the opposing team watched in silent confusion. Still, Ted continued to hold his stance and chant. So Abel began to question his unusually long incantation. Ignoring this, he also began to release his own magic. As Ted chanted, energy surged and gathered in his hand. With a final outcry, he unleashed the power from the abominable void. At the same time, Abel murmurs the word russet. After that, he and Ted followed it with a tempest spell. While the opponents were still bewildered, one of their members pointed upward. Above them, multiple spears of light descended all at once and struck them with overwhelming force. Due to this, the entire group was driven to the ground. Still, the bully's leader struggled to rise. However, another attack struck him directly. Witnessing all this, Cantor stood in shock at the sight of the defeated team. With that, he hesitantly declared Team D as the winner. Upon hearing this, Ellie excitedly shouts that they did it. As a result, the other members were also overjoyed. Immediately, Ellie approached Ted and asked why he had not used the skill earlier, but Ted explained that it had happened purely by chance. Hearing this, Abel was content to let the attention remain on Ted. However, he overheard the bully's leader cursing in frustration and muttering about the humiliation of losing to an outsider. Suddenly, he heard Abel say he might not grasp their effort, but he knew Ted earned his place through skill and perseverance, which the bullies understood. Still, a final strike was done by him and not Ted. Even so, he couldn't deny the many hours Ted spent studying and training for the exam. After all, this is something Abel had witnessed firsthand. With that, the bully's leader slumped in defeat. Unexpectedly, a hand appeared before him. Following that, Ted apologized for grabbing his collar and invited him to share manju some time. Hearing this, Abel noted Ted's fixation on manju had not changed. But after a moment of silence, the bully declined the handshake. Instead, he helped his fallen teammates, so Ellie noted his coldness despite Ted's apology. But Ted pointed out that he had not slapped his hand away. Thus, he considered this as progress. Hearing that, Ellie dismissed him as hopeless, but he stayed determined to make 100 friends. On the other hand, Abel could only smile at the sight. Later within the academy, the headmaster can be seen walking around and walking briskly down a staircase. After that, he approached a nearby door. Using his magic, he unlocked it. Upon stepping inside, he immediately noticed the cluttered state of the room. In response, Amor apologized for the mess and invited him to sit, but the headmaster's attention was caught by the monitor and noted that Emmer has been looking at it repeatedly. Emmer then explained that the footage came from a surveillance aircraft he had developed. In the recording, it showed Ted unleashing his magic and striking his opponent. However, the headmaster's interest was piqued, so Emmer knew that he noticed it too. With that, he pointed out the presence of a disguised magic that few would detect. And looking at the record, Abel was discreetly mouthing incantations. Upon learning this, Emmer vowed to uncover Abel's true identity. A few days later, the chance for Abel to explore the capital's culture with Ellie arrived. On his way, he noticed Lilith at the front desk, so he asked if she was in charge that day. Upon seeing him, she asked if he'd go to the library again, but he handed her a paper. When she saw it was a leave permit, he explained that he was going to the city, but Lilith's expression turned slightly sad. She then asked if he was going with Ellie, which confused him. So she explained that she'd gotten a similar permit earlier from a female student named Ellie. Hearing that, Abel asked if there was a problem if she said there wasn't. However, she still loved Tessident. She then said it was nothing and wished him fun, so he replied he would. Even so, Lilith felt a little lonelier. So before he could leave, she called his name again. Following that, she grabbed his uniform. So Abel quickly stopped. Shyly, she asked if he could go out with her again sometime. After a short silence, he agreed. Hearing this, Lilith smiled at his response. However, Abel thought she had a surprisingly cute side, and despite having lived for 200 years, she sometimes showed a childish expression. Suddenly, he recalled her saying she admired him deeply. So as he left, he thought it just meant respect. Meanwhile in town, Ellie waited patiently. After a while, Abel arrived and apologized if he had kept her waiting. In response, she told him that she had only just arrived. However, she was surprised Abel could apologize, and this made him ask if that was odd, but she only replied that she was only a little surprised. Setting that aside, she asked to start and offered to escort him since it was his first time in the royal capital. Hearing this, he agreed he'd be in her care since she knew the area well. For their first stop, it was the ruined memorial clock tower with an observation floor. Looking around, Abel found the mechanisms interesting due to how orderly it was. Suddenly, Ellie called him to come by the window. There, she pointed out that they could see the ocean from their position. As he looked intently, he spotted a boat and asked her what it was. Surprised, she asked if he didn't know about steamboats. When she explained, he understood it was a ship powered by magic stone fuel crossing the sea. With that, he thought it must be large to be seen from so far away. As he thought seeing it would help him understand, Ellie looked in closely. Suddenly, he began smiling while thinking this day would be a good one, but Ellie began to watch him more intently. Later, a record shot, Abel felt he learned much about the era's culture. But after watching a movie, he realized the town held many unknowns. Later on their way, he asked about a nearby store. After all, it has a fancy billboard. With that, Ellie struggled to find the right explanation. Eventually, she tells him it was called a game center, but he has no idea. so she added it was where people spent their free time and money on entertainment. Hearing this, Abel found it intriguing since the entertainment culture had grown different. Interested, he asked her to go inside. Though unsure as it was her first time too, they entered together. Unbeknownst to them, a spy regalia was watching. Inside, they saw people busily playing games, but they were soon stopped when someone noticed they were students. Suddenly, a skeletal hand touched Ellie's shoulder and asked what they were doing there. Upon seeing the skeleton, Ellie became frightened, so she hurriedly clung to Abel, who told her to calm down. He then explained that it was only an imitation brought to life with magic. Hearing this, she immediately stepped away and apologized. But the skeleton said he was used to this, even though Ellie said he wasn't the one spoken to. Setting that aside, he said the rotating section was for adults and they should use the all ages area. Therefore, they made their way there and Abel found many unusual items. Suddenly, Ellie pointed to something and hurried toward a claw machine. Inside, she confirmed that there's indeed a minimum monster. Knowing this, she excitedly said she loved the series, but Abel was confused. So she explained it was a collection of legendary magical beasts from the past. Now they were redesigned to look cute and named minimum monsters. She also added there were 200 types, and the series was popular with youth. Upon learning this, Abel examined the doll more closely. At last, he realized it was familiar because he fought some creatures before. Suddenly, Ellie pointed out her favorite monster named Johnny's. She admitted that Johnny's appearance was not the type to make girls go crazy, but she believed it would be powerful in battle. Suddenly, she heard Abel confirm it. Jamie's breath could turn anything to stone, and 3 villagers were already petrified then. He also shared they beat him with wind magic, rescued villagers, and created the petrifying magic. Hearing all this, Ellie fell silent. Soon after, Abel realized he might have said too much. Seeing her confused, he realized he really talked freely about strong past enemies. Now he wonders how he would turn this. Suddenly, she laughed and said she didn't expect him to tell such jokes. With that, Abel decided to let it go, but she called him again. She then began to ask if he found her strange for liking strong characters over cute ones. Now, she wondered if he thought she wasn't girly enough. Noticing her unease, he told her that it was natural for people to have different preferences. Besides, he thought her suited her and that essence mattered more than looks. Listening to this, she was left stunned. Still, she managed to thank him. After that, she admitted that she liked jammies more, so Abel asked if she wanted the doll. She then shyly said she did, but she thought it was impossible since the claw was too small to lift it. Abel then inspected the machine and agreed. Using his analytical eyes, he discovered that the claw's grip strength was intentionally weak. Additionally, its controls are deliberately poor. With that, he remarked that it was an unscrupulous business practice. Nevertheless, he felt no guilt about his plan, which made her ask if he planned to get the doll. After he inserted a coin, he told her that magicians like them could make the impossible possible. Thus, he wasn't stealing it. After all, he had paid the required amount to play. After activating his magic, he uses strength and magic. As a result, the claw became enveloped in energy. After that, the claw gripped the doll firmly and lifted it before Ella's eyes. Afterwards, the doll dropped into the prize chute. Meanwhile, Apol found his rematch with Jamie's after 200 years unexpectedly dull. After picking up the doll, he handed it to Ellie, but she stood frozen for a moment. Still, she took it and said she would accept it for now. In addition, she assured him that she will cherish it, but she seemed to be blushing. Afterward, they decided to stop for dessert. Ellie was clearly enjoying herself during it. She even said the pancakes were on another level, and Abel realized what they were. Suddenly, she asked if she could try his. As Abel sliced a piece, he thought food on others' plates always seemed more appealing. He then held out the fork and asked for her plate, but she quickly leaned forward and took the bite straight from his fork. After that, she said the bitter chocolate added a nice touch and declared it delicious. In return, she offered him a bite of hers and he accepted. After tasting it, he said he usually disliked sweets, but this was easy to eat. Hearing that, Ellie agreed, and that's why this was her favorite shot. However, Abel found it interesting that she wasn't picky, but she looked puzzled. So he explained he read that sharing utensils is an indirect kiss. At that, her face quickly turned red. Therefore, he guessed she was unaware and just enjoying the food. Still, he apologized for saying something unnecessary. Panic. She said indirect kisses were normal and didn't bother her. Hearing that, Abel replied that it was good then. However, he sensed her concern, but chose to trust her words. Moving on, he glanced around and remarked that this street felt different from the others. But Ellie noticed it too and said it felt retro, while Abel agreed it was nostalgic. Upon hearing that, her expression turned serious. She then noted a difference between retro and nostalgic, which alarmed him. With that, she asked who he really was since from the entrance exam to his uniform's enchantment. She thought he was far above the level of a normal student. After hearing that, he wondered how he should respond. After all, he wants to keep his past secret and only share it with Lilith to avoid trouble. That's because all he wanted now was a peaceful life. But before answering, something shiny behind Ellie caught his eye. Seeing this, he figured he should deal with it first. As he stands, he thought of how it's fine being observed at school but not outside. With that, Ellie noticed his actions and began asking him, but he continued to step closer to her. As a result, she froze as his face drew nearer. While she's panicking,
Alright, that's the end of the story. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.